but nothing better to do than play games and surf the net all day. Game Call!
The Nintendo DS completely changed handheld gaming. It gave us two screens, a touchscreen, a stylus, built-in apps, and eventually a way to get online. And for millions of players, it felt like holding the future in their hands. But what if that future had already arrived nearly a decade earlier? What if another handheld had already tried touch controls, internet access, email, and personal organizer features years before Nintendo made them mainstream? It sounds impossible, but I promise you it happened. The device was called the Game.com, and in many ways it predicted the future of portable gaming. The problem was that almost nobody wanted it. What should have been a revolutionary success story became one of the biggest failures in handheld gaming history. Now, to understand why the Game.com remains such a fascinating story, you have to go back to 1997. Now, at the time, Nintendo completely dominated handheld gaming. The original Game Boy had been on the market for years, and every company that tried to challenge it had failed. The Atari Lynx couldn't do it, the Sega Game Gear couldn't do it, and even systems with more advanced technology struggled to take away Nintendo's crown. The handheld market belonged to the Game Boy, and everyone knew it. And then came a challenger that nobody expected. Tiger Electronics was not known for making serious gaming hardware. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you probably remember Tiger for its inexpensive LCD handheld games. They were everywhere. Whether it was Sonic the Hedgehog, X-Men, Batman, or Jurassic Park, Tiger made dozens of simple handheld games that filled toy store shelves everywhere. But most were little more than electronic distractions with basic gameplay and repetitive mechanics. They were popular, but nobody would have mistaken them for a true gaming platform. And yet, in 1997, Tiger decided to think much bigger. Instead of making another inexpensive toy, the company wanted to create an entirely new kind of handheld device, and they called it the Game.com, short for game computer, and their vision was surprisingly ambitious. You see, rather than competing directly with Nintendo's kid-focused audience, Tiger hoped to attract older players by creating a handheld that blended gaming with productivity and communication. Now, on paper, the feature list sounded incredible. The Game.com included a touchscreen controlled by a stylus, something that wouldn't become common in gaming until the Nintendo DS arrived 7 years later. It offered internet connectivity through an optional modem attachment, making it the first handheld gaming system capable of accessing the internet. Users could check email, browse text-based websites, maintain a calendar, store contacts, and use a built-in calculator. Now, looking back today, those features sound completely normal because they're built into every smartphone in existence. But in 1997, they seemed almost futuristic. And Tiger's marketing leaned heavily into that futuristic image. The company promoted the Game.com as more than a gaming system. It was presented as a handheld device for the digital age, a machine that could help organize your life while also providing entertainment. And in many ways, the Game.com was trying to become something closer to a smartphone, years before smartphones even existed. But the problem was that having a great idea and successfully executing it are two very different things. The cracks started showing almost immediately. The biggest issue was the touchscreen itself. Now, while the idea was groundbreaking, the technology behind it was primitive. Instead of feeling precise and responsive, the screen was divided into visible grid sections that made accurate input difficult. Players weren't really touching specific objects on the screen. They were often just guessing which invisible box they needed to press. And games that relied heavily on the touchscreen frequently felt awkward and frustrating. And the display created another problem. Like the original Game Boy, the Game.com had no backlight, so if you weren't sitting under good lighting conditions, the screen could be very difficult to see. Now, that might not sound like a major issue today, but handheld gaming was supposed to be portable. Kids wanted to play in cars, on buses, and in bedrooms, so a dim screen made all of those situations far more frustrating than they really needed to be. Even the internet feature, one of the console's biggest selling points, wasn't nearly as impressive in practice as it sounded in advertisements. To access the web, owners needed to purchase a separate modem cartridge, and once connected, they were limited to painfully slow dial-up speeds and text-only browsing. Email functionality existed, but the overall experience was cumbersome and offered little practical value. What looked revolutionary on the box often felt like a gimmick in real life. But perhaps the most frustrating part of the Game.com story is that many industry observers believe Tiger knew these problems existed. Rumors circulated that early prototypes featured color displays and better hardware. But in order to hit a launch price of around $70, compromises were made everywhere. And the result was a machine packed with incredible ideas, but built using technology that just simply wasn't ready to support them properly. However, even with its flaws, the Game.com still had a chance to find an audience. Plenty of gaming systems have succeeded despite technical limitations. But unfortunately, Tiger Electronics managed to create another major problem through its marketing. You see, instead of convincing consumers why they should buy the system, some of the company's advertisements practically insulted them. One infamous commercial featured a smug spokesman mocking the audience while promoting the console. The most memorable line claimed that the system played more games than viewers had brain cells. And of course, rather than creating excitement, the ad left many people confused.
And it plays more games than you idiots have brain cells! Any questions? Does it play, idiot?
It seemed to alienate both younger players and the older audience Tiger was supposedly targeting. But even poor marketing can sometimes be overcome if a console has great games. But the Game.com did not. A gaming system lives or dies by its software library, and this is where the Game.com struggled the most. Across its entire lifespan, only about 20 games were released. That number was tiny compared to Nintendo's growing Game Boy library. And worse still, many of the Game.com's games failed to take advantage of the system's unique features. Tiger did secure licenses for some major franchises. Names like Mortal Kombat, Duke Nukem, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Resident Evil appeared on Game.com packaging. And at first glance, that sounded promising. But unfortunately, the actual games often failed to live up to those famous names. Nothing demonstrated the system's problems more clearly than Resident Evil 2. On the PlayStation, Resident Evil 2 was one of the most impressive games of its generation. It featured detailed graphics, cinematic storytelling, tense atmosphere, and memorable characters. But on the Game.com, it became something entirely different. The visuals were reduced to crude monochrome images. Characters barely animated, backgrounds looked static and lifeless, and much of the atmosphere that made the original special disappeared completely. The port quickly became infamous among gamers and critics, and instead of proving the Game.com could compete with major gaming platforms, it highlighted just how limited the hardware really was. And as disappointing games piled up, consumer interest began fading. Nintendo continued strengthening its position with new Game Boy releases, while Sony's PlayStation dominated the home console market. The Game.com found itself stuck in an uncomfortable middle ground. It wasn't powerful enough to compete with dedicated gaming systems, and its productivity features just weren't strong enough to attract serious PDA users. Sales never reached the levels Tiger had hoped for. Industry estimates suggest the Game.com sold fewer than 300,000 units during its entire run. And compared to the tens of millions of Game Boys sold worldwide, the difference was staggering. Tiger attempted one final rescue effort in 1999 with the release of the Game.com Pocket Pro. Now, the redesigned version was smaller, cheaper, and available in multiple colors. But in a strange twist, the company removed the modem port, eliminating one of the original system's defining features. And rather than clarifying the console's identity, the change only made things more confusing. By the year 2000, the Game.com quietly disappeared from store shelves. Tiger discontinued the platform, and what had once been marketed as the future of handheld gaming became little more than a forgotten footnote in gaming history. Yet, that's not actually the end of the story. You see, what makes the Game.com so fascinating today is how many of its ideas eventually succeeded elsewhere. Touchscreens became standard on the Nintendo DS. Portable internet access became common on smartphones and later gaming devices. Digital calendars, email, contact lists, and mobile applications are now everyday features that billions of people use without thinking twice. The Game.com failed spectacularly, but many of its ideas were absolutely correct. It wasn't wrong about where technology was heading. It was simply too early, too limited, and too poorly executed to get there first. In the end, the Game.com wasn't just another failed handheld. It was a glimpse of what portable technology could eventually become. Years before smartphones, years before the Nintendo DS, and years before mobile internet became part of everyday life, the Game.com tried to bring all of those ideas together in a single device. It failed, but its vision survived.